how's it going? Welcome to chapter 11, part 1. Okay, so we're going to be doing about a third of the chapter in this lecture, and then in the second lecture, we'll be covering the rest of the chapter, okay? So in this lecture, we'll be looking at 2 of the 3 Chinese dynasties covered in this chapter. We'll be looking at the Sui and the Tang, and then in part 2, we'll be looking at the Song, and then we'll be looking at Japan and Korea and some other parts of East Asia, okay? So per usual, I would recommend, if you can, having the PowerPoint. You can take notes on it. If you have the questions, I will be covering the first 2 questions, even dabbling into the third question, and then the last 2 questions will be covered more in the second part, or in the second part 2 lecture in this chapter, okay? But it's always a good idea to have that, and it's something you can kind of complete as we go, taking notes, and it's a way of working smarter, not harder, and making sure you're being accurate, all right? So let's get started. Okay, so on your questions, what is the date range for this chapter? Okay, so again, looking on the first page of the Earth and Its People for the chapter, it's going to be 400 to 1200 CE. Okay, so we are officially out of the BCE era. All right, and we are in the Common Era, so CE is Common Era. All right, and that's 400 to 1200 CE. All right, geographic location, we are in East Asia. Okay, you could also put Southeast Asia, but we are dominantly in East Asia. Okay, so we're going to be in China, Korea, Japan, but as we know them today, those borders are going to be a little bit different. So East Asia would be a good geographic location to put. Key civilizations. So these are what groups of people are we going to be talking about. So remember, this is where you put what names of empires, groups, religions that we will be talking about in this chapter. So we will be talking about the Sui, we'll be talking about the Tang, we'll be talking about the Song, we'll be talking about Buddhism. We will be talking about within Korea, in particular, we'll be talking about the Shilla and the Koyo in Japan, the Yamato clan in Japan. So those are probably the key places or people that we will be talking about in this chapter. For sure. So make sure you have those down. You can always look those up, and they will be covered throughout the PowerPoint as well, or you can look them up in the chapter for specific spelling. All right, so let's get started. Okay, so the first one that you're going to want to look out for, question number 1, is what is the importance of Buddhism in East Asian society? All right, and so as I get into the Sui dynasty, you're going to see very quickly how Buddhism originally spread from South Asia, right? So with the rise of Buddhism, that was Siddhartha, right, in around circa 500 BCE, so almost 1,000 years earlier. And then slowly through trade, through Indian Ocean trade and Silk Road trade, will spread into Southeast Asia. And then we're going to see it really introduced on a whole new level into East Asia, into China, and then eventually through China into Korea and Japan via China, which will be tributaries for a long period of time of China. So the cultural influence, they will adopt Buddhism from them. So we're really going to see the importance of Buddhism grow in East Asia from this 400 to 1200 era. And it's really going to start with the Sui dynasty. So in question number 1, you're really, when you talk about the importance of Buddhism in East Asian society, you're going to really see that grow and that importance grow during the Sui dynasty. So here we go. So looking at China, so if we look back at the dynasties, okay, we had the Shang, then we had the Zhou, then we had the very, very short-lived Qin, right? Okay, the one legalistic dynasty, because remember we had the 3 major philosophies rise up during the Zhou dynasty, circa 500 BC. So 500 BCE was a very important time period, right? We had the rise of Buddhism in South Asia, but then we had the rise of 3 major philosophies in East Asia. So different locations, but same time frame, okay? Legalism, Confucianism, Taoism. So Qin dynasty is the only one that practiced legalism, very short-lived, right? That's that extreme. They believe you're evil, so they rule through an iron fist or an iron, rule, and they will be short-lived. Shi Hongdi will be the only ruler of the Qin dynasty, and when he dies, they are overthrown, and that opens the door for the more moderate, middle road Han dynasty. Remember, the dates for the Han dynasty are roughly 200 to 200, circa, okay? So those aren't exact dates, so that's circa. Now, when the Han dynasty falls, remember the Han dynasty ruled kind of at the same time as the Roman Empire. So they are going to trade along the Silk Road with one another, okay? And this is also then when we see the expansion of Christianity throughout the Middle East and then Europe at that same time. And then as the Roman Empire is falling, we see, at least the Western Roman Empire, we see the Han dynasty fall as well. And then the Silk Road will decline in trade. So between 200 and 500, we're going to see a real struggle of the Silk Road. Okay, the Silk Road is really going to struggle during this time. What happens in China is it goes into a warring period, okay, where there is no one dominant dynasty. So from 200 to 581, so I would make note of that, from 200 CE to 581 CE, that's the rise, and you can see it here on the map. 581 to 612 is the Sui dynasty. All right, there's going to be what's called a warring period, where there was no one dynasty. So you have a bunch of dynasties fighting for the mandate of heaven, but no one dynasty is actually able to conquer and set up and really prove that mandate of heaven. And so it's a really unstable time in China. Talk about uncertainty. Talk about a time probably where it's scary, it's very unstable. Economically, people are struggling. There's a lot of uncertainty. There's lawlessness. Everybody, it's kind of survival of the fittest, I imagine, in a lot of ways. A lot of insecurities. Maybe a little bit like what we're feeling right now. Maybe not, maybe even worse than what we're feeling right now. At least we have a stable government, but there is a lot of uncertainty right now. So can you imagine having over 300 years of no stable government, what that must have been like? Okay, so in 581 we see the rise of the Sui dynasty. All right, and this will be a return to social order in China. And the Sui dynasty, like the Han, okay, will use the mandate of heaven to justify their rule. All right, they will practice Confucianism. So remember, every dynasty from the Han going forward will practice Confucianism. Every dynasty from the Zhou dynasty going forward will practice the mandate of heaven. So these are some consistencies that we can always carry through. All right, but Confucianism is something that they will also practice. Now they start very small, as you can see. All right, so let's talk a little bit about what the Sui dynasty was all about. So first thing, they helped to reunify China. Okay, so they reunified China and they reestablished a centralized government after having over 300 years, like we said, of a warring period. No one centralized government. All right, they were based around Confucianism, so this centralized philosophy, this middle road, right, of filial piety, of that a leader should be humane, should be fair to their people. Mutual respect, everyone accepts their place, that you put the role of society before self, and if everyone does this, that the betterment of society, that you'll have a smooth social order society. And for the most part, this does work, okay? The one new thing we see incorporated is Buddhism. All right. Now, they actually don't last very long. So you would go, why would they last less than 40 years, but they practice Confucianism? Well, it's because they took on such a major project. Now, before we get into their major project, let's talk about how they incorporated Buddhism. So what they did was they wanted to expand into Southeast Asia. And the reason they did this was because they needed a certain product that Southeast Asia agriculturally was known for. Can anybody think of what Southeast Asia agriculturally is known for? It's a staple in Asian food. Should be pretty easy to come up with. Rice, in particular, champa rice, okay? So champa rice is a breed of rice that you can grow multiple crops, 2 to 3 times a year. So the Sui dynasty, one of the things they had to do is they had to quickly feed their population. And Southeast Asia, rice is not only a great agricultural product, but it's a way to feed a lot of people in a cheap way. So in order to expand into Southeast Asia, they were looking for a way to expand without having to fight. And so they basically approached local leadership as they expanded into Southeast Asia. And here's basically what they said. They went to the local Buddhist leaders and they said, hey, what do you think if we convert to Buddhism? We'll give you Buddhist leaders tax-free land. So we'll give you palaces, we'll give you property, and we're not going to charge you taxes. All you have to do is get up and say that it's Buddha's will that we rule. Kind of like a Buddha mandate of heaven. And the Buddhist leaders were like, cool. So the Sui dynasty is going to expand into the northern part of Southeast Asia with no fighting by making basically a deal with Buddhist leaders that they would adopt Buddhism. And in exchange, these Buddhist leaders would get up and declare that it was Buddha's will, right, that the Sui dynasty rule. And in exchange, these Buddhist leaders would get special privileges, so to speak, of not having to pay taxes and getting all these special properties and living a really good life, basically being bought off in so many ways, okay? It was kind of a brilliant idea if you think about it, all right? And this way, the Sui dynasty had access to amazing agricultural products that were going to help them feed their dynasty. So this is how Buddhism really became incorporated into Chinese culture and then started to culturally diffuse with Confucianism. Now remember, Confucianism was not a religion, it was a philosophy. And Mahayana Buddhism, which is dominant in East Asian culture, okay, is a religion where Buddha is a god. So these two philosophies are actually going to blend together very well. Buddhism is a very open religion. It's about balance. It's about, the right mindset. It's about respect. It's about, putting others first. So it's actually going to blend really well with Confucius society. Now, the part of the reason that the Sui dynasty is not going to have a lot of success is because they had a very, very ambitious project, and that was the Grand Canal. The Grand Canal was this idea that they would connect the north and the south part of China. So basically they would connect the Yangtze and the Yellow River, okay, so the north and the south rivers. Otherwise you would have to do it by road, which would take forever. So they had this idea that they would dig, there's no other way to do it, they would dig this massive canal that they could basically fill with water, right, and create a canal that they could float boats up and down so that they could not only ship their military, but agricultural products that they could use, for messaging and official business and all these different things. It would be a much more efficient way to communicate. The problem was it was such an enormous project. They put so much time and effort into it that it bankrupted their dynasty. So the mandate of heaven didn't go well on them because economically it took so much tax money to build this that the economy of China was really, really bad. All right. And so the people, even though the Sui dynasty was Confucius and they had this middle road, they were practicing Buddhism, and so on paper it looks really nice. They mismanaged their money. Now it's not that this project couldn't have been great, but they just put too much effort into it at one time. It's one of those things that it's like building a house. If you got to be realistic about how long it's going to take you. If you think you're going to build a house in a month, that's not practical, right? It's going to take you 6 to 9 months to build a house, So you have to be practical with the timeline, and the Sui dynasty just wasn't practical with the timeline and how much money they were putting into it. It's like, okay, build that, but you need to be practical about how quickly you're doing it or how you're going about it, and they just weren't practical. So they're going to lose the mandate pretty quickly, unfortunately. And this is going to open the door for another dynasty. Now, so they start this project, they won't finish it. The Tang dynasty that will come later will actually finish this project. This canal is the longest man-made canal in the world today. It's over 1,100 miles long. Okay, it's really awesome. It's really amazing, and it's massive. It can hold large ships. So it was a great idea, but they were just so aggressive about it that the economy of China, after a 300-year warring period, just couldn't handle how much money it took. So the Tang dynasty is going to basically step in where the Sui dynasty left off. Okay, and here's what they're going to do. They're going to set up basically the same idea of what the Sui dynasty did. They didn't really change a whole lot. They were Confucius. They adopted Buddhism, so they took a middle road approach. They continued to build the Grand Canal to connect the Hanghe, which is the Yellow River, to the Yangtze. But what they decided to do was to take a step back, okay, and not be so aggressive with the canal, so put it more in balance. And they wanted to be more aggressive with their expansion, so they expanded further into Southeast Asia to help the agricultural aspect of the Chinese economy, which they desperately needed to feed their people and to have income. And they also expanded further west. So when you're thinking about what is each dynasty known for, right? The Shang dynasty is known for being the first civilization, right? Written record, veneration of ancestors, things like that. The Zhou dynasty, they're known for mandate of heaven, the 3 major philosophies. The Qin dynasty, right? They're the only legalistic dynasty. They built the Great Wall, right? The Great Wall of China. The Han dynasty, they're the first to practice Confucianism. They traded along the Silk Road with the Romans, so we kind of give them credit for silk, and we see the civil service exam, right? The scholarly gentry coming from the Han. So the Sui dynasty, what are they known for? They're known for the Grand Canal and incorporating Buddhism. So what you want to try to do with each dynasty is know a couple of things about them. You don't have to know everything, but just know a couple of things about them. all right? So the Tang Dynasty is going to pick up where the Sui left off. They will continue Mandate of Heaven. They'll continue Buddhism. They'll continue Confucianism, okay? But what they will do is they will focus more on expansion. So they'll expand into Southeast Asia. And you can see this on the map. They'll expand more into Central Asia. And in doing so, the Mandate of Heaven looked very favorably upon them because they had a lot of success. So this expansion looked like the gods were favoring upon them because they were so good at expanding upon this, okay? So Chang'an is going to be their capital, and a lot of different everyone they conquered, what they would do is they set up a tributary system. So for instance, Korea became a tributary of theirs, Vietnam became a tributary of theirs. So what a tributary is basically where you go in, you leave the local leadership, okay, and they agree to pay tribute to you, all right? So if you've ever seen like the Hunger Games, okay, where you have each area and they pay tribute, it's a similar kind of idea in that if you're a tributary, that you're still your own country, but you pay taxes and then you give military service. You pay allegiance to the Chinese. So you're your own group, but you are under the control. So if the Chinese, if the Tang calls you and says, we need men, you come running. We need taxes, you come running. Like whatever they need, you do. Okay, so you still rule, but you do it under their rule. You pay tribute to them. You have allegiance to them. And this is easier actually for the Chinese because they don't have to directly come in and rule. So it's actually much easier for them to do this. Okay, so whenever possible, you're going to see tributary systems become kind of the new way of ruling. It's much easier than direct rule. It's cheaper, so to speak. Think how expensive it is to send in someone to rule, to send in military, things like that. When if you just convince someone, hey, do you want me to kill you, or do you want to just cooperate and kind of everyday life will kind of be the same. You just got to pay me some taxes, and when I come a-calling, you do as I say. Most people will choose tributary. So you're going to see tributaries as kind of the new way to build an empire. So why was Buddhism so appealing? Okay, so this is kind of question number one a little bit, all right? It helped with expansion. A lot of Southeast Asia was Buddhist, so the Sui and the Tang, it made it easier for them to expand or for people to be their tributes if they were also Buddhist. So having a common religion was really easy. It was easy to blend culturally with Confucianism. It didn't contradict Confucianism. It blended well with Confucianism. So that was another reason. It was a unifying factor, okay? So it was a unifying factor in their expansion and with people that they came in contact with. So there's a lot of different reasons that Buddhism was such an important part of those societies. It helped legitimize their rule. Like I said, in a lot of cases where they were able to take over and convince Buddhist leaders with a little, giving them some favoritism on the side, convince them that this was a good idea. So Buddhism was a mutually beneficial idea. And we still see Buddhism very dominant in East Asian culture, not just in Southeast Asia, but in East Asian culture today. We see different branches of Buddhism or sects of Buddhism, but we do still see Buddhism having a very large impact in East Asia still today. So things were going well until something happened. The thing about Buddhism that contradicts Confucianism is that Confucianism and traditional East Asian culture is very patriarchal, okay? Women are very subservient. Whereas in Buddhist culture, Buddhism, women there tends to be a more lax view towards women. Now, it's not that women are equal, but women aren't so oppressed. So what's going to happen is with the introduction of Buddhism into East Asian culture during the Sui and the Tang Dynasty, the patriarchal society in East Asian culture is going to lighten. Now, it's not going to go away, but it will lighten, and we will actually see laws and the suppression of women lighten in some ways, all the way to the point where, believe it or not, there will be the first female empress. Wu Zhao, yes, that is a woman, okay? I joke in class. I know, okay, I'm not trying to make fun of her, but often people are kind of like, that's a woman? I mean, no, I would say she's the most beautiful woman ever, okay? But we all come in different looks of this, and that's not everything, okay? She actually was a very, very good ruler, very intelligent, and actually helped the Tang Dynasty to expand quite a bit under her rule, and they economically had a lot of success. So she was a very good ruler, all right? So while, maybe not the best portrait, but a very good ruler, all right? But if you are a pure Confucius, meaning you practice true traditional Confucianism, which is all about the patriarchal society, for you, hell has frozen over. Like, you are literally losing your ever-loving mind that a woman is now in charge. And you are coming unglued. Like, what has happened to our society? Oh my gosh, like a woman is in charge. We can't handle this. So during the Tang Dynasty, you're going to see a real shift. First half of the Tang Dynasty. So if you look at the dates, for the Tang Dynasty, we have 618 to 907. Okay. So for the first 100 years, okay, the Tang Dynasty will continue the practices of the Sui, and they will support Buddhism, all right? And Buddhism and Confucianism will blend. But with that blending, we will see a loosening of that patriarchal society, which means a loosening of the oppression of women, to the point that there is a female empress. Now, after her death, we are going to see a real shift, okay, in how this is approached, all right? So Buddhism is going to help legitimize women's participation in politics. It will loosen the oppression of women. And for a lot of Tang, political advisors, this was like not acceptable, and there's going to be a huge backlash and political divide, okay? And so really we see after her, so from Wu Zhao going forward in the 700s, we are going to see a huge backlash against Buddhism in the Tang Dynasty in East Asia, all right? So at one point where it was really accepted and people loved Buddhism and it was blended well with Confucianism, we're going to see a real return to pure Confucianism and people rejecting Buddhism and saying, Buddhism, look what it's done to our society. Look how it's poisoned our customs. Look what it's done. Look how women have risen up. Look how it's poisoned our patriarchal society. And look at now to the point we have a woman in charge. Like, what has happened to us? Oh my gosh. Okay? Like, this can't be happening. And so going forward in the 700s, the second half of the Tang Dynasty, we're going to see a total flip. And Buddhism actually is going to be outlawed. So they're going to take away property from the Buddhist monks. They are going to return taxes to anyone who practices Buddhism. They're actually going to persecute anyone who practices Buddhism. All right. So at first it was very well accepted, and this was part of how they peacefully expanded. And then we're going to see this real flip. And now there's going to be persecution and then this real campaign to return to pure Confucianism, all right? And, the way that we practice. The best way I can kind of describe this, okay? Think about anyone who practices any religion. I'll use Christianity as the example, okay? And I hope that you can take this as a loose example, figurative example for anyone who practices it. When someone says they're religious, that's a very, open statement, and that can mean a lot of different things, okay? So let's take Christianity, for example. Someone says, oh yeah, I'm a Christian, okay? Well, what does that exactly mean, okay? Is that someone that goes to church every single Sunday and has Bible study on Wednesday nights, someone that really is dedicated and it's super incorporated into their life? Or is that someone that's maybe kind of moderate, middle of the road, maybe once a month or here and there, it's a part of their life, but it's not like an overarching, you know what I mean, consuming part of their life, like the person who never misses a Sunday every Wednesday. Do you see what I'm saying? Okay, so you have your super, super pure Christian, you know what I mean? Like I say, where it's in every aspect ingrained in their life. Then you kind of have your middle road, right? Where it's it's there, but it's maybe not in every facet of their life. Like, we go once a month, or we go here and there, or it's important here and there. And then we have what we call the two firsts. Okay, and some of you might be chuckling because you know what I'm talking about. Okay, the 2 times a year. What are the 2 holidays? Easter and Christmas, right? The 2 times a year where you go, right? So I go to church 2 times a year. Easter and Christmas, the 2 major holidays. That's when you go. Now, all those people would claim to be Christians, right? But their level of practice or dedication, and I'm not judging or anything like that. I'm just trying to help you understand that there's a spectrum, right? So in the same way, you could apply that to almost any religion, right? When someone says they practice a religion, getting to know them, to what level is it a part of their life? Confucianism in the same way. So when we say pure Confucianism, that's going to be like the every Sunday, every Wednesday night. That's this person. It's ingrained in their system. They practice it to the letter of the law, literally, this is what's important, which patriarchal society is going to be super important. When Buddhism became incorporated into Confucius society in East Asia, it became loosened. Okay, so that patriarchal society and some of those customs had become loosened and kind of compromised. And so the pure Confucius fast is kind of trying to push Buddhism out and trying to return the mainstream back to a more very conservative practice of Confucianism, and not so much a twofer approach, where it's like, yeah, we're Confucius, but maybe not so strict in adhering to it, if that makes sense. So the second half of the Tang Dynasty, the 800s, 900s, a return back to the strict practice of Confucianism. Patriarchal society, women are subservient, letter of the law, the respect, men are in charge, the society before the individual, and really getting the scholarly gentry, civil service, really getting back to what that pure Confucius society looks like. The Tang Dynasty is also a time where inventions are really going to start to take off. And this, like I said, of the early civilizations, East Asia really is the hub of all the great technology. They really are the source of early technology that the West will build off. When we get to the Renaissance, you'll see that without the East, the West never would have had its rebirth. That without the East, we never would have had a Renaissance. We never would have had an exploration age. We never would have had a Westernization. And so what I don't like is that so much in history we don't give enough credit to the East for that it lays a foundation for the West and what the West does. Okay, and so here's some of these early technologies that help lay the foundation for those. Okay, the very before there was the printing press, there was what was called the block printing press. So imagine like a stamp. Okay, so instead of having to write every single book individually, they created stamps. Okay, so they would stamp pages and to create copies of book. Now, this was still a very long process, but your first version of a printing press was a block printing press, all right, which literally would take stamps and they would individually stamp pages, all right? And this was a long, tiresome process where they would use ink and your first types of paper, but it was the first step toward a mechanization of the mass production of a printing press, all right? You also have your first mechanical clocks coming from East Asia. How cool is that, all right? So standard keeping of time. How cool is that, all right? The first ideas of charcoal, fireworks coming from East Asia, okay? Fireworks are going to be a game changer. I mean, think about how cool fireworks are. Fireworks are not only used for celebration, but eventually will be modified into the idea of explosions, right? Where we could actually use it for like mining or to move earth. Or think again, this is going to be used in the latter part of the construction of the Grand Canal, okay? Instead of having to dig all that dirt, you can then set off explosions, right, to help move that dirt. So a lot of great early technologies that are going to be coming from the Tang Dynasty. Gunpowder will also be a part of that. So that's a rather really, really cool thing that will be modernized into weapons. We see some medical achievements as well, okay? The very first movement toward a vaccine of smallpox. Now, this actually comes from originally the Gupta in South Asia in the 300s to 500s, and then through the Silk Road and Indian Ocean trade, eventually that technology will go to East Asia. So here's how it worked, okay? So what they would do is they would take one of these small pussy pox, okay? So one of those, they would pop it, they would ooze it out. I know, really gross, okay? Take that pus. They would put it in some kind of like dish or container. They would let it dry. Then they would take, some kind of rock or something, and they would ground it up really fine so it was like a powder, okay, and mill it up almost like flour. And then, I know this sounds gross, but then they would ingest it through their nose. So they would snort it, okay, through their nose. And then this was an idea that you would actually be exposing yourself to a less lethal version of it, so building up antibodies in your system. It's kind of like when you're in your mother's womb, you're exposed to the common colds, that when you're born and you catch the common cold, it sucks to have it. It doesn't mean you don't get sick, but the common cold usually doesn't kill us, right? We just deal with it and then we move on our way. It's a similar kind of idea of building up antibodies. And then this idea will spread eventually to Europe through trade along the Silk Road. Tang women, the first part, women had property rights. They were able to remarry, divorce. Again, they were allowed to attend public, polo matches. So the first half of the Tang Dynasty, because of Buddhism, women actually had quite a few, it was quite a liberal society for women compared to other civilizations. But later on, this is really going to go away, okay? So with the return of the pure Confucianism after Wu Zhao, okay, so in the 800s, and that return to pure Confucianism, that scholarly gentry women are going to then be pushed back and going to be more oppressed for sure. And there's going to be return back to this scholarly gentry, okay? That this educated elite needs to be ruling, that education was more important than anything else. The patriarchal society was more important than anything else. And what's eventually going to happen is that peasants and merchants most of Chinese peasants and merchants were working the lands, okay? And peasants could move up only through education and servants and service in the government, okay? According to pure Confucianism, merchants are considered very low in society. Merchants are not given a lot of respect because they're considered self-seeking. So they take the work of others, right? So a merchant is the facilitator of trade, right? They're the people who take the product of one person and they sell them to another. They don't actually produce the product themselves, they buy and sell, right? They're the business owners, they buy and sell. And so in pure Confucius society, they're seen as very selfish. And so it's interesting that actually peasants were considered higher class. It really wasn't based on money. It was based on status of what you contribute to society. So peasants, a local farmer, was considered more respectable than even a wealthy merchant. A wealthy merchant, didn't matter how much money you had, you weren't actually considered respectable in pure Confucius society. And merchants were considered self-seeking because they put themselves before society. They weren't actually working in the fields for the betterment of society. They were making a profit off of your labor, and they were selling it to someone else and making a profit off of it, if that makes sense. So in a pure Confucius society, merchants are not considered respectable people. They're considered low class because they're getting rich off the labor of others. So it's considered disrespectful. If you look at question number 2, how were the fortunes of the Tang Empire related to the development of the Turkish power after 220 CE? Okay, so what happened is that as the Tang Dynasty expanded into Central Asia, they are going to have a lot of trade, but also conflict with Turkish powers in Central Asia. So that's what it's talking about. So this one you're going to have to go into the book for just a little bit, okay? Number 2. So they will trade with one another, but they will also be rivals for territory. And you'll see technologies like horses, crossbow, stirrups, gunpowder, fighting. So a lot. So this is a Central Asia question. So you'll have to look a little bit in the textbook for that one. So the development of these two was a trade relationship, but also a fighting relationship over control of the Silk Road, who had the upper hand. So sometimes they would trade with one another, but they also were battling each other over control of Central Asia because the Tang Dynasty wanted to continue that mandate of heaven and have more prominence with that. Okay, that's going to finish up our part 1 of chapter 11. So we kind of went through the, number 1 for sure, I gave you some hints on number 2. So number 3, 4, and 5, we're going to talk about in part 2. So for chapter 11, you're going to hold on to it, okay? And then we're going to finish it in part 2, and then you'll submit it after part 2, okay? So if we're doing this in separate modules, don't worry about it, and then you'll submit it in the next module, okay? If this is split up into 2 different modules, okay? Hope you have a great day and you're doing well, and we'll talk soon.